So my name is Jeremy Osborne. I am happy to be hosting this event for opera programs in Berlin. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about myself. At first, we're going to do a little kind of introduction round. So my name is Jeremy Osborne. I'm American, born and raised in Arkansas in the United States. I've been in Berlin since 2014, just got permanent residency, woohoo, in the process of applying for citizenship. That's another story. I am a singer. I have a degree in vocal performance in the University of Central Arkansas and the Peabody Conservatory. I've sung in extra choruses at the Komische Oper and the Deutsche Oper. And I do concerts with this pianist, fabulous pianist actually named Bonnie Wagner. Yeah, we've done Schubert and things like that. But I work at Deutsche Welle and as a translator and a speaker, and I guess relatively politically active. My Black Lives Matter Berlin t-shirt on. And yeah, I think this would be a great opportunity for us to talk about kind of the current situation that's boiling over, particularly in the United States, but all over the place. And how those issues relate to the world of opera. But at first, I think we should talk about ourselves. And so I was just gonna have everybody go around, I was just gonna go around and have people kind of talk about themselves, like what's your background in music, where you're from, what brought you to Germany, and then what made you want to participate in this discussion? I would also be curious to hear what people have to say about that. What about the topic, interest in it, et cetera. So can we start with Raehann?
Sure. Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Raehann Bryce-Davis. I'm a mezzo-soprano. I currently am in New York, but I've grown up kind of all around North America. I went to grad school at Manhattan School of Music, did some young artist programs in the States, and then got an opportunity to do a Porgy and Bess tour in Europe. So I did that, saved all my money, and stayed in Europe for 2 months afterwards, did all the competitions I could squeeze in, and was really fortunate to have won several of them, like the Hilde Zadok in Vienna, and I went on to do lots of them, and that's kind of how I got started in Europe. My first ensemble was at Opera Vlaanderen in Antwerp, and now I've started doing lots of guesting. I was in Nuremberg, I did my first Eboli, so I'm doing my best, living my best mezzo life nowadays, Eboli, Azucena, Sara and Roberto Devereux at LA Opera, and all of those things. So that's me.
Okay, and let's have who next? Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Weiss. I'm also a mezzo-soprano, and I grew up in the US. I'm from San Diego, California originally, and then I've lived all over the US. I'm currently in Phoenix, Arizona. I am an assistant professor at Arizona State University, but before I came here, I was fortunate enough to win the Opera Foundation scholarship to Deutsche Oper Berlin, and so I was there in the kind of mid-2000s as a stipendiat, and I've worked there as a guest for the last however many years. And I guessed around Europe. I've sung in Cologne, I've sung in Frankfurt, I've sung in Schwerin and Berlin Philharmonic, and so that's how I came to be one of these Berlin people, I guess. I also come to Berlin when I have a chance. It's a little hard during COVID time, so I'm in Arizona now. So that's my short story.
Can I ask what it is that drew you to this discussion in particular, or was there anything in particular that drew you to this topic?
I just think that this is the time to talk about this now with everything going on in the world, and also to support my friends of color. Obviously, I am not a person of color, but I fully support all of my friends of color and am interested in helping for equity and diversity in all aspects, in academia, on the stage, everywhere. So
good to know. Then let's have Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kevin John Edusei. I'm a conductor born and raised in Germany, Bielefeld, Germany, the city that doesn't exist. And I was trained originally as a pianist and a classical percussionist. I also have a degree in sound engineering for classical music, and then was infected by the theater bug that led to my work at opera houses as the Komische Oper Berlin, Semperoper Dresden, Volksoper Wien, State Opera Hamburg, and recently the English National Opera. I've also worked in Switzerland as the chief conductor of the Bern Opera House.
Okay, and what was it that attracted you to this discussion, this topic?
Well, luckily, the whole discussion is also very vivid in Germany, as you all know. And I found it particularly interesting to look at this topic with and its relationship to opera and classical music.
Okay, then let's try Melody.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Melody Wilson, mezzo-soprano, living in Vienna for the last 5.5 years. I am originally from the greater Philadelphia area and am freelance artist. So I'm just kind of bouncing around wherever I happen to work. I've worked here in Vienna, in Budapest, as well as the Staatsoper, most recently at Seattle Opera, in Berlin as well at the Festspiele, here at the Festwochen as well, among other places. This discussion is so important to me, not only for myself, but my friends and colleagues, those that will come after us, and those that have already started to kind of pave the way for people like me and Raehann and Kevin and so forth. So I think that this discussion is something that has always been there, and we can continue to fight so that we can have better inclusion and equity, and specifically for Black people, but also for people of color and XYZ ABC. So diversity.
Okay. How about Byron?
Sorry, I had to find the microphone button. Hi, everybody. I'm Byron Knutson. I'm originally from Canada. I am, in fact, still a Canadian citizen. Educated in Canada and in the United States. Have been living in Germany for 20 years. The first 15 of those were in various opera houses all over Germany. Actually, Kevin was my boss for 1 year in Augsburg, and that's how I know Kevin. Then I moved to Berlin to work at the Komische Oper, where I was the music director of the Young Artist Program at the Komische Oper until 2014. After that, my current position is professor of opera interpretation at the Hans Eisler Conservatory here in Berlin.
Okay, and what drew you to this topic, this discussion, if anything in particular?
The very superficial answer to that is Julie and Anastasia asked me if I knew any people of color in Germany. And they didn't ask me actually at the beginning to be a part of the discussion at all. But then as we were discussing what exactly the form of this discussion would take, we realized that, or Julie and Anastasia realized that it would be a good idea maybe to have somebody from an institute of higher education just involved in the discussion. And during the last summer semester, when the Black Lives Matter movement was really taking off in America, it was definitely one of the things that our students at the school were talking about, at least in some kinds of small ways. I mean, most of school didn't, of course, happen at all this past semester. So everything there was no like very large discussion about it, but it was definitely a topic that was the students were very interested in. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, and Jeremy Bynes?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Bynes. I'm the chorus director at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. I am British and Irish. I've been living in Berlin for 3 years, almost to the day. Before I came to Berlin, I was chorus master at Glyndebourne. I was there for 8 years, their longest ever serving chorus master since their beginning. And yeah, trained as a repetitor, played the piano, I'm a conductor as well. But yeah, British and Irish, but sort of British trained, and here I am in Germany.
Okay, and did anything in particular inspire you to want to take part in this discussion? Was there something in particular that made you feel like, well, I really want to discuss this? Or
yeah, I mean, it's the whole issue of race and racism in opera is one that I've thought a lot about in the last few months, and I think all the conversations about it in the last few months have really made people like me think about the past and the future, and whether they're things that we've been guilty of, whether they're things that we need to really air. And of course, racism is a white person's problem. So, I mean, we're the ones doing it. So, yeah, so it's a privilege to be here and be part of this chat.
all right, did I get everybody? Has everybody introduced themselves?
No, not me.
Ah, so Sarah, sorry about that.
Am I next?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Stevens. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm Sarah Stevens. I'm an American. I'm from Minneapolis originally, which is actually where I am right now because I've fled New York City. I live in New York City now. I lived in Germany for 32 years. And while I was in Germany, I started my first opera management agency. I'm an artist manager. And I started in Bremen, where I first lived. That was in 1994. I've been doing this for 25 years. And then in 2008, I moved to New York City and started an agency with my partner, Mark Nicholson. And it turned out I was expecting to do more business actually in the United States. I always wanted to make a bridge between the two countries. But it turned out that there's much more work in Germany than there is really any place else in the world. So, and because I lived there so long and because I'd started the business there so long, it just made sense for me to be being more in Berlin than especially doing the mid-level houses in the United States. That's a whole different discussion, but the mid-level houses in Germany are, I think, kind of where it's at, especially in terms of getting younger artists, emerging artists going in the opera world. So that's essentially what I do. This conversation is, in my eyes, long overdue. I've been observing this in Germany all those years, and actually even more so in the United States. I would like to talk about education if we can, and how that, especially, I just would like to talk about how singers are educated and what happens to them in the kind of the 5 years after they've completed their degrees, because I think that's a key point of where the split starts happening and where we start seeing more racism. So
For sure.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. I know Melody. Actually, I sent her on her first audition in Germany at Bremen. so we've known each other for some time. And I met Sarai in New York. Gosh, how long ago? Before she went to Berlin. 2 years ago, we talked about race and her going to Germany before she left. I get asked that a lot. And then she moved to Berlin. I was thrilled when she asked, and I've seen her since in Berlin. I was thrilled that she asked me to be part of this conversation. So yeah, so I'm based in New York. I'm based in New York, but I spend a good part of the year actually in Berlin. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I also have a really good. I have a question I'm gonna ask everyone about the training in opera specifically. So that'll keep you in mind for that one definitely. But first, we need to introduce Leslie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Kwan. I'm a New Yorker, American New Yorker, depending upon what you say when you go to London. I'm based in London now. I'm a harpsichordist, entrepreneur. I ran my own Baroque orchestra in Boston for about 8 seasons. I also have marketing experience, so I worked for the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Handel and Haydn Society in marketing positions for them. And also the Chineke Foundation, which is the only I don't know if I should say BAME, but Black orchestra in all of Europe. And so I was their marketing person for a few months, which was really exciting. And I'm now in London because I've launched a chamber music series exclusively for hospitals that specialize in pediatrics and cancer. It's something that I did back in the United States and it was really successful. So I got a chance to do it here. And my experience with opera is pretty unique because as a harpsichordist, I get to accompany opera singers all the time. And you can imagine there's not a lot of us in opera, especially in early music. So I wanted to be part of this conversation to share my experiences with that. Also being a harpsichordist and one of the few specialists in early music in the United States.
Okay, well, the first question that I wanted to pose to everyone, or to everyone who has something to say about it is, but it seems like a lot of people, not everyone, has come from other places to Germany, and that's what their perspective is based on. And since this discussion is about the racism in opera, et cetera, I just was curious about the differences that people have noticed in the way German society deals with racism versus the way that it's dealt with in the countries that they were either born and raised in. Or if you're like, Kevin is German, then maybe he has lived anywhere else. And if he has noticed, either from the media or from living someplace else, things that are better or worse about the kind of societal understanding of racism. Kind of a large question, but I'm just wanted to ask that before we maybe get into the industry specific stuff. I think we maybe need to start a little bit more generally.
Yeah,
I have a, oh, sorry.
If I may answer that, but it's a large and complex question indeed. But Germany has a very specific history, and certainly the development of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland after the Second World War has some influence in how racism in Germany is functioning and how it affects people who live here. And I think one of the major factors when we look at racism in Germany is that there was a long time when we thought that racism would work alongside the political axis. So if you were, let's say, right-wing or right extremist, you would be racist, and if you were liberal or left-wing, you were anti-racist. And what I see now in the current discussion is that this dogma is fortunately is breaking up more and more, and people discover that racism is not so much about a political notions and opinions, but is a structural thing that affects all people who live in our society. So the privileges that white people have also affect BIPOC people in their racism towards other society members.
I would agree with all of that. Does anyone else have any observations? For example, for the person coming from someplace else, either just how the discussions are held or how institutions deal with accusations of racism or discrimination?
Well, I would like to just say that being American and now living not in Germany, but in Austria, I think it depends on where the person is from. So for example, I'll give you a true life story here. So I was in a rehearsal, first day of rehearsal here in Vienna for an opera, and my colleague, she was so excited and she meant well, but she's from a little Austrian village, and I think that even though she lives now in Vienna, she's just not used to being around different kinds of people. And in the first day of rehearsal, she said to me, "Oh, it's so wonderful that we have such diverse Blumenmädchen. You know, you're from Africa." And this other colleague who was from China, she said she's Japanese. And I was like horrified, thinking, well, and I was really angry. But I said, this is an opportunity for me to teach to educate. And I think that that's something that we Black people are very familiar with doing, is not being angry, but using that opportunity to educate someone, to familiarize that person with Blackness and tell them, by the way, not all Black people come directly from Africa, even though our ancestors are African. You know, we have Black people in the Caribbean and in Europe and whatever. And my colleague who is Chinese, and for me, who definitely looks very Chinese, is nowhere near Japanese. And she thought about it and she said, oh my gosh, you're so right. I didn't think about that way. And I'm really, truly sorry. I didn't mean it that way at all. And I was trying to come from a good place. And I get it. You know, I knew what she was trying to do, but that kind of thing happens all the time, whether it's an opera or in an office in New York. And the thing is that people just need to be more aware by surrounding themselves, I think, with diversity. And it's hard though, when you're coming from these small villages, you know, 3 hours from Vienna and Steyr somewhere, you know, you're not seeing a lot of different kinds of people there. So you're probably going to walk around and say a lot of things that are quite offensive just because you're not used to dealing with different kinds of people. Okay, I'm blabbering on, but you get my point.
I loved so much of what you shared just now, Melody. I think it's interesting that you said that, you know, you made the choice not to be angry. And that's such a difficult choice to make, you know, and not everybody is in a position to make that because there's so many things to be angry about. I started the pandemic really not, you know, like right after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, after all of these sequences of murders, I really took it upon myself to have these conversations very openly on Facebook. I come from a small town in Texas, and not everyone is as, you know, as woke as a lot of my friends here in New York. And so I had a lot of these conversations very publicly. And they, at the beginning, I was like, yeah, I'm making real change. This is working. It's great. But eventually I found myself getting extremely exhausted because I was taking my own stories and like daily just like martyring myself and my feelings. And I appreciated so much of what Jeremy Vine said of that, you know, it's so helpful when white people can be a part of this conversation. So many of my Facebook friends, when I just like couldn't anymore, I couldn't talk, I couldn't explain to people why I mattered. So many of my white friends came and supported me and you know, took up this conversation of anti-racism, and I was so grateful for them in that moment. In answering the actual question, Jeremy Osborne, I think Europe has long been a haven for Black performers. When America has completely shut us off from a lot of resources and opportunities, Europe has been has traditionally been much more open. I myself had that experience. I was working in America, but I wasn't working on the level that I wanted to be. So I came to Europe. I did lots of competitions in America and I never even placed. And then so it was a shock to me when I came to Europe and I was like winning everything. And I think it's a difference. In Europe, they could see the talent and they were judging off of the talent. Whereas in America, a lot of it is about pedigree. You have to come from a certain place. You have to have a specific amount of people that are vouching for you, and then we can accept you, you know? Whereas I didn't encounter that as much in Europe. But I will say that both of them, both continents, the whole world really, we need to work on allowing people to tell their own stories. Because on neither continent do we have Black directors, conductors, dramaturgs telling the stories. Most of these conversations are about hiring more Black singers, which yes, is essential. But even more than that, if we want to tell authentic stories that are reflective of our worlds, we need to hire diverse creatives as well. So those are my thoughts on that.
Amen to that. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on their experiences, either with discussions or either, bringing up racism in an institutional level, how that's been received in different countries, or what are their just general thoughts based on how the discussion is held in the media, anything like that?
I have a thought, may I?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to say something that Raehann said about the historical context in which African Americans or Black singers were more accepted in Europe. And of course, we know that had to do with Jim Crow. I mean, it goes back to Marian Anderson, right? Who could not perform in the United States at Constitution Hall. She went to Europe and was a huge success. Josephine Baker. I have found, and this is a question for the others as well, that yes, the Europeans have been more open to African-American singers. Jesse Norman is another example who started in Berlin. There is a history of that. I mean, and also James Baldwin, wasn't a singer, and Nina Simone, think of her. So, and this is a question, really. I have found that most Europeans view them as something exotic, as something that's just almost weird and kind of exotic, but not something, so I'm asking, right? But not something that's on the same level of who they are. So in other words, Josephine Baker as an entertainer, she was just an entertainer and something you pay a ticket for. So, and I found that problematic in taking, let's say, our singers to mid-level houses and getting them hired. The traditionally, stars that were viewed as something exotic and weird and unusual and almost as objects. That's how I sometimes felt it was. Did not translate down into the mid-level houses. So this is actually a question for those of you who have had experiences there. Have you experienced that? What's your experience?
Can I say something?
Sure.
I'm not a singer, but as a harpsichordist, I can tell you, having lived in Paris for 2.5 years before moving to London, I find that the differences culturally are frankly just about the fact that I love Baroque music. So in moving to Paris and falling in love with French Baroque music, when I told people that I was a clavecинiste, they said, "Oh, madame," and immediately launched into this huge, wonderful conversation about French Baroque repertoire. And there was no conversation as to, well, how did you get to that space? Whereas in the United States, especially as a New Yorker, I had several conversations, which was rather tiresome. Well, how do you get to a harpsichord? As if, being a pianist was such a foreign concept to go from piano to harpsichord. And it was really quite intriguing. And it was very similar here, just moving to London the last 10 months, a similar conversation, telling people, well, I'm a harpsichordist. Oh, do you know Trevor Pinnock? Do you know so-and-so? And it just automatically assumed that once you speak that language, you just know. And so I personally haven't experienced it in that capacity as a novelty in Europe, but in the United States, I had one guy literally say, well, the harpsichord is such a rare instrument. I can't imagine how expensive it must have been, not recognizing that a modern piano would cost, $150,000, $200,000, and a harpsichord could easily run you, $80,000 or $90,000 if you get a really great one. So it was an interesting conversation and positioning for me. I always felt that I needed to qualify why I was a harpsichordist in the United States. Whereas here, it's just been, oh, well, so you must listen to this recording, you must have this experience, and it's really just about the music.
It's funny, if I can say, just, Sarah, you mentioned Josephine Baker, and I'm sure I'm getting slightly off topic here. I have no doubt that what you said about her being seen as something exotic was to a large extent true then. It's funny, I watched a very good documentary about Miles Davis not so long ago, and he said that when he moved to Paris, that was the first time he felt free after being in the States so long, and the first time he was suddenly in society with, you know, Sartre and all these philosophers and stuff, and it's the first time he was treated as a sort of intellectual equal among people. I don't know how that's relevant to any of the discussion here, but all I mean is I'm sure that there are all sorts of mixed experiences historically and both today.
I would agree with the feeling of somehow here the pedigree issue. I would definitely agree with Raehann. In the United States, you just don't even get in the door. You can't even get in the door if you didn't sing a certain place already, participate in a certain young artist program, go to a very, very specific school, even when those schools are not necessarily producing singers of a particular quality. It's like something about the name. And then if you don't have that, you just can't get in the door. Whereas here, I have had the experience, and I've seen it from other people as well, that if you kind of stick at it, you have to be tenacious. There's a certain, okay, you have to stick at it. But that people do end up kind of getting to sing. If they're really good and you're really persistent, you might not be able to, you know, be Renee Fleming, but you can get to sing if you keep at it and you work hard. And I don't necessarily have that feeling about the training system and the gatekeeping that occurs in the United States. And to that end, I wanted to talk a little bit about the training in opera in general, because, and Jeremy, you wrote this in your response. We were talking about representation, and you were talking about the number of South Korean singers in the chorus of the Deutsche Oper, et cetera, et cetera. And you were mentioning the fact that you believe that that the people who are really excluded in opera, that the exclusion happens long before, it's before the auditions. So, and I think that idea is also supported by, there's this study that's been making the rounds. Like, have you guys read about this guy named Andrew Moravchik? I can't say his last name ever. He's a Princeton professor, and he did this great big paper and study on the decline of Verdi and Wagner voices. And he really dispels a lot of the most common myths, but there are basically three big ones. Number one is the ubiquity of the microphone makes it harder to identify voices that have a lot of great operatic potential. Because everyone has a microphone now. A lot of the great singers of the early 20th century, they sang in church, and people said, oh my goodness, Luciano's really loud. Maybe he should go study with Madame Puppenpapper in France. And that doesn't happen as much anymore. So then the second reason, and this is the humdinger, is the fact that you kind of have to develop within a time frame that runs contrary to how the instrument develops. Because singing, and this is how he says it in his article, is one of the few like athletic activities that singers come into later in life, 35, 40 years old. But the young artist programs, particularly for the women, cut off sometimes as early as 28, 26. So you're kind of beating the clock, and then you end up trying to fight to get a position, and you're not artistically developed. And then people get in the positions, they're singing repertoire before they can maybe necessarily really handle it. It's a whole thing that's very, very, it's not very conducive to artistic development. And the last thing he mentions is the fact that even when the person does make it through all that, then they're not necessarily picked because they're either too old or, you know, the voice is not prioritized. All of that rambling to pose this question. In what ways do you guys think that the training in opera makes it such that talented singers, particularly singers of color, are not able to reach their full potential and are basically cut off at the pass in that way? And what can be done to alter this paradigm so that the training that as it exists now is, first of all, very elitist and very expensive, doesn't eliminate a lot of really, really potentially talented singers?
That's such a, that's such a rich question. And I hope, Stephanie, that you hold on to the brilliance that you were about to say. Can I just quickly address what Sarah was saying? Because I think it's such, please, Stephanie.
Well, we'll be back with that in a second when she gets back. I was just going to talk a little bit about academia as it is now. I've been at my school for 4 years now, and over the 4 years, we as an institution have started to look at how can we help develop bigger voices, you know, and start the training there, because I think some bigger voices are kind of neglected in undergraduate programs because people just don't know what to do with them and kind of favor the lighter voices that are going to be ready to go into these shiny young artist programs at age 23, 24. And also just with regard to repertoire and also finding great talent. And one thing that we were looking at and have actively changed now is for undergraduates who are, you know, coming into our conservatory-like program. Before it was, you know, sing your 2 art songs or 2 or 3 art songs for your audition. Now we actually have added what we call the wild card piece that people can sing. And so if somebody, you know, has grown up in the church and has a killer gospel piece that they want to bring and show what their real voice is, like how they've been trained and how we can use what is intrinsic and move that into classical training if that's the training that they desire, then we can really see the talent instead of judging on some superficial thing. Sometimes people don't have access to voice lessons, so maybe they don't know what an art song is, but maybe they're really interested in singing classical music, but they just haven't had the access or the training. And so we at our school are trying to find the talent from where the talent came from and build on that from there. So that's a little change that we're starting to make, and hopefully we'll start to reap the results of that as the new classes come in and we see what happens with the talent.
Well, that's definitely good to know.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you though a quick follow-up question. Would you, or do you have the sense that other people who are on the faculty at the university where you're working, say you're choosing a student for a master's degree, would you choose a student who had not as good of a pedigree, but who was just vocally more interesting and compelling over the person that did? Or how often do you feel that is that like an unspoken thing that people say, oh, but this person went there? Or is it just something that's very much explicitly discussed? Oh, this person went there, ooh la la, like let's take this person. Or do you really feel that it's this person saying in a more compelling way, we're taking that person, period?
I think I can only speak to my institution, but I think that every time somebody comes in to sing, we listen to the voice and then we talk about it. And like we have their resumes and whatever in front of us. For me personally, I'm interested in what I'm hearing and what I hear in the sound and how I can help find their voice. I do have an example. One student that I took into my studio, he's a little bit older. I think he's now 29, maybe 28, doesn't matter. And he has a bachelor's degree in voice, but it took him a little longer to get there because he started off as a tuba player. And he has, I call him my baby Eric Owens. I mean, he has this kind of Eric Owens voice, and it's just a stunning instrument. And when he came to audition for us, you could hear this instrument, and it just really wasn't quite completely hooked up yet. But that's why you go to school. And so I was like, I can help this guy. Like, I am interested in this voice, and I want him in my studio. So but as a whole faculty, we do have discussions about that. And I think we have a lot of kind of diamonds in the rough at my school, I would say. They all have amazing voices, but maybe just haven't reached their potential yet. And so we do discuss it and try to see who we can help and who we can help get to the next level.
Okay. Raehann, are you back?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chat quickly about what Sarah was saying, which I thought was so essential. And I was also reminded by something that Stephanie said of her student that she called the baby Eric Owens. I mean, we have traditionally so many Black singers that are these dramatic voices, you know, our Shirley Varetts, our, you know, all these just powerhouses, Leontynes. And there can be these stereotypes of what Black singers are good at, you know, the very angry roles, the very sexual roles, as Sarah was saying. It's a very pointed decision that a young Black singer has to make when to sing her first Carmen. Because if the first thing you're known for is your Carmen, you continue down this path that can lead to a career of just Carmens and Dalilas, because already Black, you're already just pigeonholed into this very sexualized being. And that's something that is just ingrained in our cultures, I think, on both sides of the pond, of the sexualization of the Black woman's body. I mean, even from the days of slavery, the Black woman was always available to the slave master as purely a sexual being, with very little power. And just continuing down in the ages, it's a very strong stigma that we have. And now, even with something as positive as having a successful career, you still have to be very careful in how to deal with those kind of stigmas that can result in something positive like a contract, but can result in a long-term pigeonholing of yourself as a sexual being on stage for the enjoyment of the populace.
And Kevin, did you want to say something a bit earlier?
Well, I think also that it was wonderful what Sarah was saying, and I'm thinking about answers to the question why the sort of tokenism that you spoke about, Sarah, why that doesn't translate to the mid-level houses in Germany, for example, having more BIPOC singers. I don't have a clear answer for that, but of course we're also facing a demographic problem here because there are almost no BIPOC classical musicians in Germany, because there are not many people of African, Asian, indigenous heritage or ethnicity in Germany. And in Germany and Austria, and I think also in Switzerland, there are also absolutely no numbers available of how many people who think of themselves being Black live in those countries. So, so we have, first of all, that phenomenon you talked about, that we have Afro-American singers coming to Europe, coming to Germany, who sort of fulfill this tokenism role. And we don't have people from Germany who were born and raised here, who come from here and have their training here, their first years at smaller houses, and then work their way to the bigger houses. So I think it's a combination of those two things that that makes it so hard to translate that tokenism phenomenon to seeing more people of other ethnicities at mid-level houses. Okay. Maybe that could be an explanation, or but it's up for debate. I think all of you have some answers for that, maybe, hopefully.
I wanted to ask maybe Jeremy Bynes, because obviously you're in the position where you have the house course at the Deutsche Oper. I don't know how often positions there are coming open. I mean, I know that a lot of people are there for many decades, but as far as the applications that you receive, have you noticed anything? Are there any patterns as far as like?
I have hardly ever had an application from a Black person. I've been there now 3 seasons, and we must have applications. Okay, when a soprano place becomes available, there's usually about 200 applications. When it's a second bass place, it's about 30. So several hundred, and since I've been there, applications I've read through CVs, and I think there've maybe been 4 or 5 Black people or people of color amongst those applications. We have a huge number of applications from Korean people. I know that's off topic, but the questionnaire that was sent before this discussion mentioned people of color, and the whole black versus people of color, that's a whole other topic which I don't know if we want to go down, but yeah, there are a vast amount of very talented Korean applicants, and yeah, so we have a lot of Korean people in the chorus, but yeah, black people hardly any. What's interesting, if I can go back to what Jeremy, you mentioned a little while ago about how to break the cycle. Mm-hmm. I can't really speak for Germany so much. I'm still relatively new here, but I was at Glyndebourne for 8 years, and there we auditioned nearly the entire chorus every year. So between 50 and 75% of the chorus was new every year. And the chorus there runs for the summer season of about 5 months, plus a tour of an additional 3 or 4 months. So it's 9 months of the year. It's a not insubstantial chunk of the year. And we would go to all the major conservatoires in the UK and hear applicants. And I remember one year we took 100% of the black people we heard in audition because she was great. You know, we heard one black person, and so that's my point. So why aren't we hearing black people in conservatoires? Why aren't they going to conservatoires? I mean, obviously London has a substantial black population, much more so than Berlin. Is classical music something that's not attractive to black people in London? Why don't they go down that route? And I think there is an awful lot of untapped talent around that we just simply, our ecosystem never gets to experience and to put through music college. And so it's very hard to get a fair representation of a population on stage when you're not really, you're sort of yeah, don't have that many applications. You don't get the opportunity, someone like me doesn't get the opportunity to hear many black people sing, really.
And I think that is the $64,000 question, as it were. It's kind of this cycle, right? Because then if people of color don't necessarily see themselves on the stage, then they start to feel like, well, this isn't something that I can do. Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell a story. I remember being in Vienna and watching the Star Wars movie, the first of that new trilogy that came out, and being at the very, very end of the movie with that actress, she started fighting Adam Driver. And I got goosebumps, and I was like, why did my brain not accept the fact that she is the hero? It was just like, I just was like, and I started to think about it. It's like, of course she was the Jedi. She was the one moving stuff with her mind like the whole time. It was like, but you just never see it. Like, and that's why there's this, I think it's by, not Ava DuVernay, Shonda Rhimes, and she says, you can't be what you can't see. So it's this kind of thing where it just kind of reinforces this idea that that Black people are not necessarily interested in classical music. But I think, and I've had this conversation before, that the issue is money usually, and that classical music and access to classical music training requires a certain knowledge, a certain like cultural knowledge that's usually passed down from within families, and or just money, like having access, for example, to a piano. I think that's why there's never been a really world-renowned, one of many reasons why there's never been a really world-renowned Black concert pianist. If you don't start playing the piano by the time you're about 3 to 6, you're probably not going to be able to do it usually, right? Like there's this window, and if you don't have parents who could be like, oh, so-and-so has this kind of aptitude for music, let's get them piano lessons, get them the piano that they can practice all the time. It's just not going to happen. And I think opera is, interestingly enough, one of these fields where, yes, you come into it later in life, but you need a lot of other skills. You need language skills. You still have to have the ability to learn, and memorize hundreds of pages of music. And this issue of access to the training, I think, is still unfortunately very elitist. And I was wondering if anyone has any comments on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, go ahead. I'll go next.
I have a lot to say, and cut me off when it's next, but I just wanted to mention Don Shirley, right? The pianist, the great pianist, and also Nina Simone, who was rejected from the conservatories in New York, and then got
Curtis,
right, yeah. And Don Shirley went to Russia to be trained, right? So anyway, I think my question, so I have a lot to say, but one thing I would like to say is from an agent's point of view, we have been hearing students that have come out of the conservatories from all ends. Last year I was at the Hans Eisler Institute in Berlin, and we also hear from Manhattan School of Music, from Juilliard, AVA, Peabody, Oberlin, and in my perspective, there's a huge difference because the Hans Eisler was all white, like all white. I think there was one Chinese woman, but there were Russians. There was a woman from Estonia, I believe. So if not German, then more Eastern European. And in the United States, what we're seeing now is it's heavily Asian. And we're talking about Korea and Chinese. A lot of really good Chinese singers are now being trained, very few Japanese and African Americans. So what I'm seeing is that from the American conservatories, actually the white kids are in the minority. So one of the things that interests me is what happens afterwards. What happens?
What do you mean when you say that? I have a question. What do you mean when you say that they're in the minority? You mean that they're in the minority of the people who are the ones who are really good, or they're literally in the minority?
No. I'm talking about the graduates. They come out of MSN. They come out of Juilliard. Generally there are very few white people who are now graduating from those conservatories with master's degrees and vocal diplomas. So it's the opposite of what I'm seeing in Berlin. That's what I've been observing I've been in New York now since 2009. So one of my questions, and we're seeing a lot of really good Korean, African-American, Chinese singers coming out of the American conservatories. They're there. They're definitely there. Whether or not they make it to Germany is a whole different question. But one of the things that I do in particular, is give seminars on auditioning and working in Germany for the kids that come out of the American conservatories. And if they want to go to Germany, because there's more work there. So, and if I just may say one more thing, and then you can stop me, because I got a lot to say, sorry. But the other thing is that Kevin was talking about the numbers. And I just want to throw this out there, the numbers game. So American conservatories are still training, I don't know how many graduates come out of the American conservatories every year, but a large number of singers who come out with a huge student debt. Hello, we need to talk about that, right? And then what are their options? I mean, it is just brutal. It's just brutal. And, we see a lot of the young artists who we now call professional young artists, who have been doing young artist programs for 10 years. And the only kids that can do that, sorry if I call them kids, but the only people who can do that who come from some kind of resource.
Yes.
They've got to have some kind of backing, either from their family or from their husband or from somebody who's going to support them. Because you can't, it's less than a living wage. I'm sure you all know that the young artist programs pay peanuts in the United States.
Yes.
So that's what I meant by narrowing the field after graduation.
So then I have a question I wanted to ask. That was because I graduated, just a couple of things. I mean, there's a lot to respond to, but I graduated from Peabody, I guess it was in 2010. And there were some Black people who I went to school with. But I still definitely, and there were also very, very talented South Korean students, but I definitely felt like the overwhelming majority of the people that I was in school with were white. And
not what I'm seeing now.
Okay. And I also feel that, this is also kind of piggybacks on what Jeremy Bynes was saying, that yes, there is this tendency for South Korean students and singers to be overrepresented in the chorus. But why then is that not necessarily reflected then as much in the solo roles? I work at Deutsche Welle, and I had to do the voiceover for this documentary on opera. Opera is a tough business, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that was interesting about the feature is there is a study done by the Bertelsmann Institute, and it found that actually singers from outside, from other countries than Germany, were better trained and more disciplined than the ones that are coming from Germany. which I also think is very, very interesting. But if that is the case, then why isn't that, as if, you know, I think it's been the case for a while now that South Korea has produced these technically fantastic singers. And then they're not necessarily the ones getting the lead role. So where is that kind of disconnect? But I think there are a couple of people who had some reactions that they wanted to make. So
yeah, I
Leslie?
wanted to say something in reference to Jeremy Vines' comment about access with Black people with classical music. Because, for example, Nina Simone, most of the women in American pop music had access to a piano or a guitar. Most of them started off on one of those two instruments or singing in the church. So there was always a community, at least, to have access to sing and have your outlet put out there. But racism prevented those women from going ahead and becoming classical musicians. But almost all of them, if you read their history, they all had an interest in classical music. From a marketing perspective, I can tell you, literally, it's the detail about paying attention to who you put in your marketing materials. Invariably, there is always a Black person or a person of color in community engagement. There's always this element of rescuing and let's pick them up and raise them up and provide this beautiful, you know, Western music that they don't have access to. But I think the bottom line is when it comes to marketing classical music globally, the conversation should be about, well, it's just beautiful music. So people just gravitate to what's beautiful. I've spent, you know, the last 2 years in Paris and going to museums and seeing people, you know, French people of all different cultures and creeds and going in there with their kids, and everyone just loves it because it's beautiful. I don't think that we start having the conversation about whether or not classical music is their thing because they just don't have an interest. I actually find in the United States, especially, it's quite the opposite. I think people respond, you know, Black people aren't a monolith. So I think there are obviously lots of us around the world that love this music. It's a question of getting the opportunity to present ourselves and getting on the same platforms as our white counterparts. And when you have marketing that's completely targeted on just the white lens or a Japanese lens, then you don't have a sense of where you are. But when you turn through the program book and you discover, oh, well, they really need me for a community engagement, but they don't need me on the main stage, or they don't need me behind in the administration. So it's always the story in which we present classical music that I think is also a big issue, that we're not sharing the stories, which is the whole point of this panel here today, is that everyone gets to talk about what, you know, classical music means to you, what opera means to you, why is it so powerful? I can tell you, growing up as a kid in New York City, I went to LaGuardia High School. How many of us walked out of that building, you know, either bopping to rap or listening to Leontine? It was amazing. There was no question, whatever felt right. And I think that a lot of what we talk about when it comes to opera and classical music is just in all these different little boxes. And it's just about the fact of, well, does it really feel good? Because that's all that really matters, you know? And if people can just get past these boxes that we put around opera and classical music and just say, great, this person loves it, they sing it well, let's give them an opportunity, not because, you know, Strauss wrote this thing and this person's supposed to look a certain way. It has to also be relevant for the times. So I find that when it comes from a marketing perspective, that's huge.
Okay. I wanted to, sorry, go ahead. I was going to actually ask Byron a question. Is that who's just speaking? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. What is your question? Maybe I can tie it all together.
I was going to ask you, because you know, you were at, you know, a different, you know, part of this whole opera machine, and that you were working for years as the head of the Young Artist Program at the Komische Oper. So you also then probably had the opportunity to see several hundred applications every year for probably just a few positions. So did you notice any patterns as far as, you know, countries, nationalities, ethnic backgrounds, and what do you think that's attributed to, and what do you think could be done to change it, or what were your general impressions and observations from your time at the Komische Oper?
Okay, the Young Artist Program at the Komische Oper, I mean, okay, we had six young artists every 2 years. It was a 2-year program with 6 people. and we usually had 100 to 150 applications per position. And I have to say, one of the things that someone said earlier was about age limits for the Komische Oper, for the young artist programs in general. For the young artist programs in Germany, there are published age limits, but in most cases, the people who are running those programs are really interested in finding the right person and not necessarily the right person under that age limit. So I would say that age limits in Germany for the young artist programs are a lot more flexible than they are in the United States. At least they were at the Komische Oper while I was there. A lot of applications were, well, sorry, one more time. 80% of the applications that we had were from people who were already living in Europe. I would say relatively few people applied from outside Europe for that program. Presumably for economic reasons, because no one wants to, buy a plane ticket on spec from Southeast Asia or from Australia or from the United States, which is wasn't even that expensive, but nobody wants to make that investment for maybe getting an audition. And so it just sort of seemed to me at the Komische Oper and now at the Hans Eisler that these programs are really not on the radar of North American students. One thing that I can say about the Hans Eisler, in the 5.5 years that I've been there, we've had exactly one American person of color apply at our school. One in 5.5 years. And I think that that's a pity, considering that, going to the school in the United States means essentially that you're burdened with crushing debt after your education. I find it a pity that more students in America who are finishing their undergraduate degrees aren't interested in coming to Germany, where higher education is free. And so I would just like to tell you guys, if you have students or if you know people who are finishing their undergraduate degrees and are looking for master's degrees and don't want to burden themselves with even more student debt, that conservatories in Germany, and I'm not just plugging my school, but conservatories in Germany, the education is free. And I think that if more people of color would take advantage of that, then we would have people coming out of the German conservatory system. And Sarah, this speaks to what you were saying earlier. Those are exactly the kinds of people who would be then available for mid-level houses in Germany. They would be educated in the system. They would speak the language. The expectations of the people who do the hiring would be fulfilled at a much higher level before they even see the application. I think that might possibly be a step in the right direction.
Do you think there might be? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I accept so much what he's saying, and so many of the points that have been made have resonated very strongly. I think sometimes we can take a pointer from other industries. In sports, every team wants to have the absolute best team, the best talent. And in arts, we want to have the best talent that can be reflective of our society and the storytelling that exists in our worlds. I think if we sit at our desks and we look in front of us and we don't see the pools that we want to see, then we go and get them. Clearly they exist somewhere. In America, there are historically Black colleges and universities. In Germany, if you see an extraordinarily talented high school student, then a college should recruit them. They should go to where they are and get them from there. Clearly, all of these inequities exist financially and just in terms of access. So we can take part in breaking down those walls by going to the location and getting these people and recruiting like they do in sports. Why can't we be recruiters as well in opera to create the stages that we want to create?
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add?
I will. Yeah, may I? I wanted to respond in part to what Byron said. You know, and really getting back to what Stephanie said, that they're revamping their criteria for accepting students. I think, in my opinion, and again, this is one of the reasons why I do these sessions of, you know, auditioning and working in Germany, is because it is not taught in the American conservatories. I'm always shocked. I don't know what, you know, oftentimes they, you know, they're trained, they're highly skilled and wonderfully trained students, but then they get out of the graduate schools and start applying for the young artist programs, and then things start falling apart pretty quickly, because most of them, I want to say 90% of them won't make it. And some of those students could go, those well-trained, highly trained students could be going to Germany. So I think this is a failure, or some, let's put it in a positive head, but it could be, you know, there could be some recreation that could go on at the conservatories in the United States, and recruiting, which I think is a really good idea, Raehann, in the German conservatories. And that would be one way to kind of work from the ground up to change the industry.
Yeah, it's communication for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback on something that Raehann was saying about taking a lesson from other industries. I mentioned this in the discussion yesterday, and I'm going to mention this again. But you know, when Tarana Burke's Me Too hashtag took off after it was kind of co-opted by some women in Hollywood, to be fair, they were largely using it to a good purpose. But just to always remember that it was Tarana Burke who said that originally, Black woman. I think that is not to be forgotten. But that some of the most powerful actresses in Hollywood, people like Emma Thompson, people like Sharon Stone, spoke up about the rampant sexual abuse, sexual harassment in Hollywood. At the beginning of this year, or the end of last year, there was an article in the Associated Press about the dynamic in the world of opera with regard to sexual harassment allegations. And yes, we had some famous get pulled down after these really massive exposés were printed in major newspapers. But what never occurred was that the people at the top of the industry did not come forward and start speaking up on behalf of the voiceless people who we'll never know about, whose entire careers were cut off before they even started because of abusive behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how that relates to this topic is that I believe, and I mean, I think this is demonstrated by the dynamic with regard to sexual abuse and harassment allegations, is that the power dynamics in opera are not very conducive of people pointing out institutional failures, racist behavior, et cetera. So I wondered if, you know, particularly in this day and age, it's so difficult, if it's even possible, to not be a political person when the world is getting really, really unstable. Not to say that it's ever been, that there's some magical point in the past, but it is really this tension that's happening all over the West. But what can be done in the opera industry to kind of loosen this stranglehold that kind of this handful of powerful individuals seem to have over the futures of entire swaths of people in the industry, or at least to change the perception that that is the case, that has created this kind of culture of silence.
Jeremy, what is your question?
The question is, what do we think can be done about the power imbalances in the world of opera that make it difficult for people to speak up about racism?
Well, it's very hard to speak about racism within this beloved art form that we all call our core of work. But I think it would also be very wise for this discussion to point at the problems of casting and how BIPOC singers are viewed by directors and casting directors for certain roles. And it's a little bit unfortunate that we don't have a director here in the round, but I would ask this question, whether what are the things that you have experienced in those cases?
Are you asking me in particular?
This goes out to everyone here in the round.
I see.
Because I think it hopefully is related to what you were asking also.
I'd like to piggyback off of that, Kevin, if you don't mind. I think, yes, casting is very important, but I think in making people more comfortable in speaking out, we have to have people in admin, we have to have people behind the scenes that are hiring everyone at the company, starting there, and then worry about the singers, et cetera. Because the singer, at the end of the day, only has but so much power. You know, you come and you do your job, you sing on stage, but you don't really want to ruffle feathers. And especially if you're a person of color, you're always very aware and micromanaging everything that you do. So you're seen to be just as prepared as your white counterparts. And I know I certainly always feel that way. I don't know if Raehann and others on the panel always feel that, but you're scrutinized much more carefully, especially when you're in the limelight as a singer on the stage. So I think if you have someone in casting, or the general director, or the stage director as another person of color, someone with a bit more clout, it would definitely help.
That's an interesting question, just from a, sorry, Stephanie, I'll say this very quickly. I can say that, you know, it is definitely a leadership thing, but it's also a core value of the organization. And I find that with younger organizations that are having conversations about race, it's a lot easier to have more diversity, not just behind the stage, but on the stage. And that's reflected in the audience. But if you're dealing with organizations that are considerably older, and most of the organizations that we're talking about now are, you know, 50, 60, 100 years old or older, the value system that those institutions were built on are completely different to what they are now. And with that tradition comes the kind of mindset when it comes to leadership. So when you have situations at different opera companies where there's issues with race and people are afraid to speak out, it's because literally leadership has not changed its lens in how they present the music and how it's valued and how it's perceived and accepted by people of color. And so when you get an artist that's on the stage that has this experience, they're afraid to express their feelings. It's literally because the people in power haven't shifted it. So how do you make that change? How do you feel comfortable enough to go ahead and say something? And I think that that's actually requires a shift in leadership in what their values are as an organization. And that probably means rewriting your whole way of being. But I can tell from experience I've had personally and with other people that that's been the larger issue, is having leadership reconsider what their missions are and what their intentions are when it comes to hiring, so that the space itself is welcoming. I had another career in luxury fashion for over 10 years. And that's a major industry where you cannot get away with anything when it comes to racism, and they will bring it out and talk about it. And so we had practices. We would sit in meetings and role play, being one person, if they were Muslim, and another person who were Chinese, and just explaining how it feels. And I think that when you have an organization that has that built in at the top, the trickle down is much easier. And so everyone feels comfortable when they come into a store, everyone feels comfortable when they go into a board meeting. But I find in the performing arts, and particularly in opera, and in my field in early music, it's a really challenging conversation because those kinds of thinking is just not part of their current thing now. So how do you, to me, it's how do you break that wall with those leaders and have them say, okay, we're in the 21st century. We have to stop thinking like we're back in the 19th century.
Amen to that.
Mm. I think that's absolutely crucial, Leslie, what you're saying. I think it starts with small steps. It's always nice when you go to the Kurmische Oper and see that there are surtitles available in Turkish, because Berlin has an enormous Turkish population. I think that's a really positive thing. Their publications are partly in Turkish as well. I think Barry Kosky, who is the leader of the Kurmische, has done some great work in that respect there. I was also pleased quite recently to see my own boss quoted in a paper as, strongly opposing tenors going blackface to sing Othello, which a certain famous tenor has sort of uttered his own opinion about that in the last few months. You're dead right, Leslie, and it's so important. And yeah, may those smaller steps turn into big ones soon.
I mean, I think it's just an issue of just doing it. You just make the decision of what you want and you just do it. In the UK, they wanted to have more women on boards. And so they made a law that by, I think it was 2021, they would have 30% of women on boards. And therefore, they created steps to see that end result. We just need to set the goal and meet the goal. If we continue being like, we really want this, eventually we're gonna work. No, it's not gonna happen. If you want something, you make it happen. You just need to make the commitment.
I found organizations have been scared to make that step because no one wants to be the first. That's what I've been hearing a lot, at least in the US, that no one wants to come forward and say, okay, we're going to try this and see what happens, because they don't want to fumble. It's already expensive to run a season. So how do you go ahead and put together these steps and implement them and not get a guarantee to your donors that are making it possible for you to make this season work, that it's going to be a success? You don't know. But I mean, I think that's the whole beauty of it, is that you actually recognize that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And that the end goal is that everyone feels comfortable and safe and happy. And you can't get to that unless you try. And you're gonna have to try repeatedly over and over again. And you're right, it is the intention. We have to just do it. But who's gonna do it first? No one really wants to put their foot out there yet. And I found that that's been the biggest issue.
I had a conversation with a singer who had a very major career, who pointed out something to me about issues of abuse of authority and things like that in the world of opera that are somewhat to some extent just simply structural. So for example, if somebody experiences bad behavior, or some particular director or whatever is known to be discriminatory or whatever, what have you, but that person then moves around, right? So it's like, what do you do? Because the pieces of the puzzle are always moving. So it's hard, I think, to then for the institutions to have a strong memory. Some of it is just structural, because it's like these pieces of the puzzle just move, and there's a bit of, I think, the fact that particularly singers, but people in opera tend to feel like they're very expendable. And there's, to that end, I don't really experience a lot of solidarity. I don't have the impression that opera singers and the people in the performing arts in general view themselves as workers who need to bundle together and fight for, against precarious conditions. It's more like, I'm going to be a star and then I won't have to deal with the rest of you peons. So I wondered if anybody could say anything about what could be done in opera to increase solidarity, so that people are supporting each other when either they bring attention to bad treatment, racist behavior, sexual harassment, whatever else. What can be done to combat this kind of culture of fear that people have, that exists, and that prevents people from speaking up about things?
I think that's so important. I was going to say something earlier about just kind of having people in power who are in solidarity with the singers. There's I was in a production once with a Black singer, and he had to wear this horrifying makeup, and he was like, I look ridiculous. This does not look right. I am not doing this. And when he spoke up to the director was like, no, I want you to look like that. And he was so upset. And, of course, it started kind of affecting his singing and just his kind of well-being. And and he's like, I just don't know what to do. And I'm not sure if he spoke to the higher ups. I'm not sure about that. But he ended up in this show wearing this awful makeup. And now, just to, I guess, answer what you just asked, Jeremy, I think we all do need to stand up with our colleagues and you know, say, he does look ridiculous. Like, this is, and he feels terrible. Like, this is not going to work for any of us. Because if he feels uncomfortable, we feel uncomfortable, and we feel anxious for him as well as with him. And so I think if we do kind of create a culture of standing up with each other, I think maybe we could change some things. I also think that, you know, I've spoken with, and maybe Raehann and Melody, you probably have many stories about this, that, you know, like, you go into a show that's maybe a Wiederaufnahme that's already been done, and maybe you had a colleague before you who maybe was white or was South Korean, and then they're like, no, you have to play it or look just like this. No, you don't. You absolutely don't. And so I think there also, you know, kind of needs to be a culture around that as well, of, you know, yes, sticking to what the concept of a production is, but also having an individuality as a singer. So those are my 2 cents on.
Thanks for that.
Certainly. Certainly.
Oh,
go ahead, Melody.
No, actually, that just brought back a story for me. I missed out on doing a gig in Germany, actually, for that exact reason. And we've talked a lot about having people in administrative positions that are people of color, BIPOC people. But also, it's important that we have people in the costume departments and people in makeup as well, because I lost a job because they were doing this very strange Zauberflöte, and everyone was this blue color. But the makeup artist did not know how to make my skin tone the same color blue, because they didn't have the right base to make me look blue. So they said, oh, well, then you can't do it. Oh, okay, well, it's a good thing I was already at that house to do something else. I was jumping in for that, but you know, that was a missed opportunity for me. And I also wanted to say, as far as how can we help others, other people of color and whatnot. And I think recommending people, I certainly do. There's someone on this panel that certainly recommended me for something. Thank you very much, or many things. So I think that that's also very helpful, just kind of keeping your eye open and say, oh, you know, I can't do that, or I'm not available, but perhaps this person who is equally qualified could be available for this job. So.
I think there's just so much that's important about being willing to be vulnerable and uncomfortable. You know, we've all worked so hard in our fields to become experts in them. And so much about this whole racial climate is something we're not an expert in, you know, and you have to be willing to be uncomfortable to gain the information and the training that you need to make something that we've never seen before. In terms of the makeup conversation, I was really fortunate when I started in Belgium. They had a makeup team that was just like, okay, what are we gonna do? You know, they'd never had to work with natural hair before. They didn't know what to do with the foundation to make it match. And so they had like an hour playing session to be like, okay, how does this work? How do they make it flat? How do we put a wig on? You know, they asked me, and then the next time I saw them, they had watched all of these YouTube tutorials, and they're like, okay, here we go, we're cornrowing. And I had 3 white women, one here, one here, one here. And they were like, what?
That's awesome.
You know? And that's what it takes to be able to create a stage that is worthy of the stories that we're trying to tell, you know? And they had to be willing to be like, I don't know how to do this. Let me figure out how to do this. And there's so many makeup artists all around the world that are not willing to take that chance. And I see pictures of myself later in a production when I thought I was looking fierce, and my face is like a totally different shade than my neck and my chest. You know, and I can't tell that because it looks different from the stage, but they kind of just look and they're like,
yeah.
You know? And I think that has to do just so much with this whole conversation. We don't know all the answers. I don't know all the answers. None of us knows all the answers. And we just have to be willing to be uncomfortable and go and get those answers because they do exist. A lot of industries are more successful than we are on these issues. And we can go and find out what solutions people have used to solve a lot of these.
I think, Jeremy, what you said, Joe, to your point about supporting those of us who experience this racism and then feeling like left out because no one's around us supporting us. I think in keeping with community, it's also about having our colleagues say, I saw that happen and I didn't like it. I didn't like how it made you feel, and speaking about it in that moment. I have found personally in my experience and experience of other colleagues that our white counterparts will say something afterwards. And it's like, no, I really needed you to chime in and say something right there and then, because otherwise we sit there as people of color, as Black people, and just microanalyze every single thing that came out of our mouth, our face expression, everything. And you just second guess yourself, and it's exhausting. So I think that if, in working with leadership, especially leadership where we don't know if we can go ahead and be honest. And that's why I was saying it really comes down to leadership choosing to be honest themselves and saying, okay, we're not good at this. We need to take care of that. We can also count upon our colleagues to say, okay, well, I saw so-and-so touch this person this way, or I saw so-and-so, they heard a racial slur, then that changes the conversation, that changes the energy, and everything works a whole lot better if everyone feels safe. And I don't mean it in like someone getting physically hurt, but emotionally, because what we do, so much of it is emotional. So you need to know that when you're spending hours and hours of your day with your colleagues, that you can count on them. That's everything.
I would also add that I have had a makeup situation where somebody, to their credit, intervened, and it didn't turn into anything big and dramatic, but it really, really makes a difference when someone says, that's a little not okay. And then the whole dynamic goes, whoop, it's like the whole thing changes, because it's also really inappropriate. And I think that this is something that people in the industry have to understand as well, is that it's inappropriate to put vulnerable minorities in the position of having to teach or explain things to people who have more authority than them, because there's a power imbalance there. And then it can turn into, well, you could have said it a little bit more nicely and things like that. And then it's on us then to kind of babysit the feelings of the person who is in the position, to make sure that such circumstances never arise in the first place. So it's really important that people kind of speak up on behalf of, whatever they see that's wrong. But, we were talking about racism. So that when they see something that feels strange or that makes them uncomfortable, they should speak up. That's important. It's exactly as you said, and in that moment.
Right. May I just say something that I want to thank you three, Jeremy and Leslie and Raehann, for this, because that's really helpful. Sometimes, there's the whole discussion about, who owns the narrative, right? And so there's the question of, for me as a white person, to coming into saving someone, which is not my role. But I feel personally that I feel personal responsibility to be an ally. And I've learned a lot over the last couple of years about being an ally, and I'm working on it. And so it's helpful to hear you say that when then when I observe something like that, and I have had casting directors say, oh, I don't want to hear another Korean tenor, I've heard people say things like that, and or no, we can't have a Black Mimi. Fine for a Venus, but not a Black Mimi. So, I've heard people say that, and so it's helpful for me to know. So I thank you for that. That you want someone like me to speak out. I'll do it. Believe me, it's time. It's time.
It's humanity. I mean, to me, it's
Yeah.
just essentially humanity. And when it comes to conversations around race, I'm always blown away when my colleagues struggle with this element of humanity. And to me, it's just really simple. You see someone that's in distress, you want to help them.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we get into these boxes when we talk about race and opera and classical music, but we do. But if we can all make each other feel so great when we make the music together, then we should be able to have the same kind of energy when we're not feeling great, and help each other up.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we need to start wrapping up here. Does anybody have anything they really want to get off their chest before I kind of wrap
Actually,
it up?
if you don't mind, I have one more thing I'd like to mention, because I mean, I think this paradigm shift that we're seeing happen has been in the making prior to George Floyd. I just want to tell you guys again, I'm from Minneapolis, and I was here when when it happened, and you know, I was here when the city was, I mean, it was horrible. But anyway, my daughter lives very close to where the precinct burned down, so I felt like I was really a part of all this. And I'm watching the shift. I went to the memorial service and listened to Al Sharpton talk about how people were demonstrating in Germany. You know, he said it's not just the Black protesters, it's Germany, it's Berlin, it's the white people that he said there. This is the time of change, and I believe that. And not long after that, the Richard Tucker episode happened, which I'm sure you all followed, in which one of the sons of Richard Tucker made some terrible racist comments about Black Lives Matters on a Facebook site of an African-American singer. And Lawrence Brownlee came out and made a beautiful statement about that. Is the only African-American singer who has ever had any award from the Richard Tucker Foundation. And I think that's opening up a box where people are saying, okay, this is not right. We need to make some changes at the administration level, with the competitions, with the administrations, with the casting. I mean, in the end, I don't think little steps are enough, Jeremy. I mean, I love that idea, but I think we're at a time now where we can make bigger changes, and I think this conversation is part of it. And I hope there are lots of people watching this who will be inspired by this and will, you know, be willing to make themselves more vulnerable, Raehann, you know, and willing to speak out about it and think about it differently. So, okay, thank you.
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to say?
I would just add that I think certainly why I came to the arts was this opportunity to find this beautiful spiritual place where we can grapple with these moral issues, expressing these universal stories, and just being part of something so beautiful and so spiritual in a way. And I think if we want art to continue to be that, we have to do everything we can with the power that we have to create this world that we're talking about, that none of us knows how it looks, but we know that we want art to be this place where we can all wrestle with these stories. And the thing is, these stories of people of color are being told either way. I've been in several productions where I've had wonderful white directors that are telling these stories, dealing with immigration and dealing with slavery or the civil rights and all of these very tough decisions. But we'll never truly be able to have art that represents us if we don't put power in the hands of those whose story it belongs. Whatever we can with the power that we have to make these anti-racist steps and create the stages for the sake of opera, for the sake of all of our futures. create this beautiful and holy place that we want to see.
Amen to that.
Yep.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say to wrap it up?
The future of opera and classical music is diversity. Thanks, everyone here.
Well, last call if anyone wants to say anything else.
I just want to say it's a real privilege to be a part of this, especially as a non-opera person. But working with opera singers, it's been a real joy to participate. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for taking part. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our discussion. It's the second of two discussions about race and racism in the world of opera in Germany in particular, but opera and in general. And we're glad that you all tuned in. This chat will also be available online on the Opera Programs in Berlin Facebook page. All of us will probably definitely be sharing it. But I hope this conversation could be elucidating, that people take the information that they either got here or felt empowered by some kind of validation that they heard, and take it and go out into the world and make things better. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks for everybody for participating. And I think we're going to stick around for a few minutes after the live stream ends so that we can do some housekeeping type things.